Are there any countries with good policies for blind people that we can take as examples or models?
I think that the countries probably that have some good models, it depends on what you're talking about. For example, if I look at the Scandinavian countries, they have a very good system where people who are blind can access funds to buy equipment, whether it be for study, for home, for work. You know, they have a very, they pay high taxes, of course, in those countries.
Right.
And money is paid back to people, say, with disabilities or into the community generally to allow people to be able to participate. So they have some very good programs. I mean, it does help if you have a lot of money to have good programs. I think countries that have discrimination laws, discrimination on the basis of disability are countries that do good things. Some countries do some very interesting things around microcredit programs, micro enterprise. I think there's some good ones in India for people who are blind.
Yes.
My experience is often that people who are blind have not been engaged in some of the micro enterprise programs. Not deliberately, but I guess because those running them might think someone who's blind might not be able to do the work. I'm not sure, but I know in India they've got some good ones running. I don't think we could say that in every aspect of life one country might do everything well. Mm-hmm. I think there's different things, different pockets. In the United States they have some very good rehabilitation and training programs for people who go blind in life to go and learn the skills of blindness. Where you go and live in and for 3, 6, 9 months do some training funded by the government. I think India do some similar programs. Mm-hmm. But so there's kind of, different countries have different elements that are very good.
Globally, which areas do you think should be the top priorities that policies of countries around the world should improve upon?
I think policies and programs in all countries should be based on the principles of universal design, so that if you're building a building, mm-hmm. you should be building a building that includes elevators with braille, with talking, with wheelchair accessibility. So, every new program, every new development program in a country included aspects that would cater for the greatest number of people, that's all people with disabilities, that would make life so much easier for persons with disabilities. So I guess my thing, if I was talking to governments in any countries of the world and talking on policy, using the principles of universal design in the development of your policies and the implementation of them and monitoring of them so that people with disabilities are included would make a huge difference. And then we could focus our energies on assisting people, in the areas where universal design policy can't cover them, like teaching braille or something, mm-hmm. where you don't necessarily learn braille from a classroom teacher in school, but, you can have a specialist teacher to teach that. But
right.
If schools were built so that they're accessible, so someone with a wheelchair could come to that school, or someone who was blind, had some equipment at that school, they could come, that would make life a lot more easy.
You've talked to a lot of governments about these issues. What's the feedback so far?
I think in principle, governments would agree with that. But sometimes what happens is in the detail, it doesn't always follow through. Or when money is of short supply, often you forget. But I know in my own countries, we've done a lot of work. We have a Disability Discrimination Act. But then to get a premises built to include accessibility, it's always cheaper to do it at the time you build the building than add it on later. So, that's been a challenge, particularly in countries where they're very old buildings and it's not that simple to kind of make them accessible.
Mm-hmm. In the area of education, how does the quality of education for visually impaired children fare compared to education in other public schools?
Well, I think it depends where we talk. I mentioned earlier that in many developing countries, children get none. So, often there are situations where schools don't allow children to come. It's not even compulsory for children with a disability to go to school, so they're not faring too well. Mm-hmm. In other countries, children go to mainstream school and inclusive education is becoming more and more the norm. so that children with a disability, children who are blind, go to the local school where their brothers and sisters and their local friends go. But then they must have the resources or ability to be able to teach the specific skills of blindness as well as mainstream education. And, you know, there are some countries that have special schools for children who are blind, so a blind school, for example. I know in India, they have about 200 schools for the blind. But India is a country with very many people, and, you know, still many people do not go to school at all because of just the sheer location, numbers, and a whole lot of reasons. So I think in some countries, children who are blind get good educations if they can get the skills. In my country alone, many people do go to university who are blind but don't necessarily get a job. So, but if you live even in my country where it's a wealthy country and people do well, if you live in the rural, remote areas of Australia, then you don't do so well, do you know? So we're working very hard with the International Council on Education for Vision Impaired, and we, the World Blind Union and ICEVI, are working on a campaign called Education for All Vision Impairment, and it's a variation to the UNESCO initiative of Education for All, which is about universal access to education for all children in the world. What we found when that was launched in 1990, and I think it was launched here in Bangkok, many children with disabilities weren't captured in that program, and so what we've done is take that program and are working with governments to ensure that children who are blind get access to an education. So, you know, some blind people are very well educated, and some have none, and there's an awful lot in between.
What does the World Blind Union do?
So the World Blind Union is the international body of organisations of and for the blind. So organisations of blind people and organisations providing services to blind people. So we have members in 190 countries, and we're divided into 6 regions. And I'd say we're an advocacy, lobbying, policy organisation. We don't ourselves deliver services, our members might, but our work falls into 3 broad categories: representation, capacity building, and information sharing. And when I say representation, what I'm talking about there is our work with the United Nations and its agencies, and that work our work on access, that's access to information, to the physical environment and to technology, and our work in the area of human rights for persons who are blind, and our work in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And our capacity building means building the capacity of individuals and of organisations of the blind in the world, working in the area of employment to try and change that situation. In Braille, Braille is about the teaching of Braille, the production of Braille, the promotion of Braille, and the affordability for people of the equipment for Braille, and ensuring that the diverse populations of our own members, women, youth, children, older persons, are included in our work. And resource sharing is about resource sharing, making sure we are able to direct people or provide information on anything about blindness to anyone who contacts us. Developing and establishing international partnerships with other organisations, and about ensuring that the different language populations of our own membership can be actively participating in our own work. So that's a very broad summary of what we do. So we span all age groups, all topics.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, and we have lots of very good members and very generous members who help us with our work, because we're like an umbrella body. We don't have a lot of money, and we rely on the very goodwill of our people, but we are a strong movement. 285 million people who are blind in the world is a very large number,